Last fall, I was reading an Old Testament theology book by John Walton, and I liked one of the statements out of it, and I posted it out on Facebook. Well, one of my Facebook friends comes from long ago in high school, a guy that's always thought he's smarter than me, and he may be, you know. But he's always also a pagan, an atheist pagan, right? And so he said, well, Mark, can you summarize the message of the Bible? Think if you can do this. Can you summarize the message of the Bible in 7 words or less? He thought he had me. I responded, the holy God dwelling among holy people. I think that summarizes it. Funny thing, my Facebook friend from high school never responded back. Isn't that amazing? You know? Well, see, the opening of the Bible, creation, connects to the end of the Bible, the new creation. And both of them are concerned with God dwelling among His people. In fact, that's what covenant's doing as it drives the story forward from creation to the new creation. And my guess is a lot of times when we study creation, we're not talking about that. We're talking about other things. But I think the point and the purpose of creation is to tell us that God wants to dwell among His people. That's why He creates this temple garden, okay? And so the creative activity of God starts things off, and the creative activity of God is part of our future hope. Behold, in chapter 21, I'm making all things new. And in Revelation, contrary to how we normally talk about it, John has, if you would, kind of heaven coming to us, doesn't he? I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. In other words, it's not really right to say the conclusion of Revelation is about going to heaven, because heaven's coming to us. That's the language of the text. That may ruffle some feathers, but that's the language of the text. So I got a lot to cover in this. I won't get done. We'll see how far we go. In verses 1 through 8 of chapter 1, we have this new heaven and new earth. He's got this vision of the new creation. I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And so, you know, we've got this heaven, and first heaven and the first earth have passed away. Well, how does that take place in Revelation? Well, back in chapter 20, I saw this great white throne and Him who was seated on it, and from His presence, heaven and sky, earth and sky fled away, and no place was found for them. So here's the coming of God, the throne of God, and what? The present heaven and earth kind of skedaddle, right? And then when you get to 21:4, it says what? The former things have passed away. And also in this text, back in 21:1, it was what? The sea is no more, right? Did we catch that? Sea no more? Well, what does the sea no more mean? Is there no swimming in the new creation? I think the point is that the forces of evil and chaos will be eradicated. The new creation, part of it, part of what marks it as the new creation is an absence of powers that oppose God and diminish life. That is good news. And that signals the onset, since the forces of evil and chaos are vanquished, That signals the onset of a new order. And then in verse 2, he's got this vision of the New Jerusalem, right? I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. That is very different from this kind of ethereal, will float up in the sky on clouds kind of thought that is pervasive out there, okay? This kind of disembodied souls in God's presence kind of thing. That is not what this text envisions. Is that correct? Okay. At least Chris and I agree. And we're agreeing with John what he wrote, so we're right. Okay? Right? And so really, instead of God's people going up to heaven, the new heaven and the new earth descend to us. That's the picture. Okay? And so the conclusion of Revelation is not about going to heaven, but about living with God. And that's the same picture that's been about in Scripture, back in Isaiah 65 and verse 17, behold, I create new heavens, new earth. Former things shall not be remembered or come into mind, but be glad and rejoice forever in that which I create. For behold, I create Jerusalem to be a joy, and her people to be a gladness. And I'll rejoice in Jerusalem, be glad in my people. No more shall they be heard in the sound of in the city, the weeping and the cry of distress. And so there's this vision of this new Jerusalem coming to us. And I want you to think, one of the things I wanted us to get out of thinking about this, out of Revelation 21 and 22, when you think about new creation, now John never uses the language new creation, that's more Paul stuff, okay? He uses this term of new heavens, new earth, new Jerusalem, okay? My shorthand for that's new creation, okay? That's just how... But some of the things I want you to think about then when you think about this reality, it's a reality, right? Think of it at one thing as place, right? I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. And it symbolizes the place where the saints will live, right? It's a place. Right? It's not some sort of disembodied floating around the cosmos thing. It's a place. And I don't think I've talked too much to you this week about the seeing-hearing pattern that continues to occur throughout Revelation. It's back in chapter 5. He heard about the Lion of the tribe of Judah, but the reality of what he sees is this lamb standing as if slain, right? There's a little difference between this mighty, fierce lion and the slain lamb, right? But they're talking about one reality. You have it again in chapter 7, right? He hears about the 144,000, but then when he sees it, he sees a great multitude. Same reality, two different depictions of it. And I'd suggest to you that's the same, and there's some other places where that occurs, but those are two pretty easy to get to. The seeing-hearing pattern then in Revelation suggests that there is the creation, I'll get it out, that the new cosmos and the city temple, the New Jerusalem, are the same thing. Because in chapter 21, 1 and 2, I saw this new heaven and this new earth. And then he says what? I saw the city. The city is the new heaven and the new earth. The new earth and the new city is, new heaven and new earth is the new city. Kind of makes sense? Blowing our minds already? Come on. We're just getting started, okay? Verse 3, but then notice, I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man, and he will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be their God." In other words, our relationship with God won't just be mental or spiritual. It develops in a tangible place. It's not just fantasy world. We need to know that. If life with God at the end is only fantasy world, you might just give up your faith. It's serious, right? And so it develops in a tangible place. Now, when I say that, let me caution you about seeing that place as some sort of me-centered utopia. That'd be the wrong place. All right? But there's a lot of thoughts like that out there. And I'll pick on them, and I probably need to update this. But in an interview in 2013, John McCain said he sees heaven as something like an Iowa cornfield to go pheasant hunting. You see, that's something he enjoys, so heaven must be what he enjoys. Some sort of me-centered utopia. And I'd suggest that the same criteria and same criticism would be true of those who are anticipating golf courses, video games, exciting cars, or anything that gives us the image of Six Flags over Jesus. Let that one sink in for a second. Conspicuous consumption. I love it. You know, so one way to talk about the new heaven and the new earth is place. A second way to talk about it is people. People. He sees what? This bride prepared, adorned for her husband. He's talking about the real people of God. And it's pretty clear that the bride, that's who she represents, is the people of God. We saw it back in chapter 19 and verse 7 when we talked about the beatitude of coming to the marriage of the Lamb, right? And let us rejoice and exult and give him the glory, for the marriage of the Lamb has come and his bride has made herself ready, right? She's the one marrying the Lamb. That's the people of God. You see the same kind of thing over in chapter 21, 9 and 10. They came up from the seven angels who had the seven bowls full of wrath, saying, "Come," and spoke to me, saying, "Come, and I'll show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb," right? And this is who we're talking about, the real people of God. And let me stop and emphasize something with that. The city bride is referred to as holy 3 times. Terms related to holiness occurs 23 times in the book of Revelation. Let me contrast that to another term that we like to use, love. Love occurs only 6 times in Revelation. The important question for the reader of Revelation is not, does God love everyone equally? The important question for the reader of Revelation is, am I holy? Am I holy? Because the defiled aren't in the city. The city's holy. Okay? I've been on a holiness kick for 20 years trying to rehabilitate the concept in the church, and I've got a lot of scripture behind me, and that's a really, really important question. And so we've had this, new heaven and the new earth, and then we get an unnamed voice coming in. And in verse 3, we get the third P. If you want to think about this whole concept with P's, right? We've had place, people, now presence. The presence of God. The new creation, again, is not a me-centered utopia, but it's the overwhelming presence of God, right? I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Behold, the dwelling of God is with man, and he will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God." The boundary between heaven and earth, God's reality, God's abode, and ours is going to be permanently removed, right? And if you ask me, that's the most significant characteristic of the New Jerusalem. That's the most significant characteristic of the new heavens and the new earth, is there is divine presence in its fullness and its glory. God really wants to dwell among his people. Isn't that wonderful? Our God really wants to dwell among us. And he's tried to communicate. Did you hear the covenant formula as I read that? You will be my people and I will be your God. I mean, that's what the covenant's been doing all along. It's what the covenant's doing now. To have a people that God dwells among. And then in verse 4 you have this one. Oh, I'm one behind again, aren't I? Oh no, I'm right on place. The former things have gone. The former things have gone. You see, the necessary correspondence to the absolute divine presence is the absence of all that is anti-God. The absence of the powers that oppose God. The absence of the things that diminish life. They're all gone, right? And he's going to wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more, neither shall there be mourning nor crying nor pain anymore. The former things have passed away. And so that series of negations means the removal of all that prevents human flourishing in community before God, and the presence of all that permits and promotes flourishing before God. There's not going to be the broken relationships, the separation, the divorce, the death, the rejection, the chronic illness, the words spoken in anger or hatred, that stay with us and we can't forget. All the brokenness that takes place in this world, and there's plenty of it. And all the brokenness that's promoted in this world, and there's plenty of it, will be gone. Amen. Right? God's presence means that all things will be as they should be. See, right now, things aren't the way they're supposed to be. But one day they will. You see, what this is talking about is the home where we've always belonged. That's the home our heart really wants to ache for and always will belong to. That's what the new heaven and the new earth is. That's what the new Jerusalem is. That's what we're created for. And it'll be there in its fullness. Oh man, that's good. That's good. I'm not taking credit for it. John told us about it, right? Then we have God's voice. There's this declaration in verse 5. Behold, I'm making all things new. I think this is the first time since chapter 1 and verse 8 that God speaks directly. So we ought to pay attention, right? And he says what? I'm making all things new. Did you hear that correctly? God You know, God's not making all new things. He's making all things new. Right? All of creation is going to get to enjoy the benefits of God's redemption. I think that's correct from Romans chapter 8, 21 and 23. Even Colossians has that about the death of Christ is to reconcile everything. Right? And so there's the declaration and there's the command in verse 5. He also said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. And we've hit the significance of writing it down before, so I'm not staying very long there. And then we've got a promise. So if you want a fourth P about the new heavens, new earth, new creation, new Jerusalem, however you want to say it, not only is it a place, people, presence of God, but it's also a promise. Right? He said to me, it's done. You see, only when all things have been made new does God say with finality, all is done. It's done. I'm the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning, the end. To the thirsty I will give from the spring of water of life without payment. The one who conquers will have this heritage, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. You see, God's purposes don't just end with judgment. That's chapter 20. Chapter 20 is judgment. But I'm thankful our God doesn't just want to end everything with judgment. No, we get to turn the page into chapter 21 and chapter 22. His purposes end in new creation. That's where his purpose ends at. And God identifies himself as the ruler of the universe with the titles Alpha and Omega, beginning and end. G.B. Caird, in his little commentary on Revelation, said this: the end is not an event. The end is a person. There's God. There's God, right? And so you've got several images here in verses 6 and 7 to depict the redeemed. If I had time, I'd unpack them. But we'll just note them, right? They're the thirsty who receive the water of life. They're the conqueror, the overcomer. Thirdly, there's their inheritance. Fourthly, there's the adoption. That's really good stuff that I'm just flying through, but I've got other stuff to get to. Okay? And then you have a warning in verse 8. But as for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, all liars. Isn't that interesting? You get all with liars. And I think probably that's because truth and deceit have been such a strong emphasis throughout this text. And so he's really emphasizing it with liars. Their portion, it's not the new heavens, new earth. It's not New Jerusalem. Their portion's in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. This is the second of 3 sin lists in Revelation. And in this list, 8 types of people come under judgment. And I don't think I need to unpack that too much, right? But all those behaviors on this list are understood as opposite of God, right? The overcomers that God's calling for in this book are the opposite of the cowardly. Those who abandon their faith in the face of opposition, right? The faithful are those who stay with their faith no matter what the cost. Those who do not love their life even unto death, right? Like Jesus, like Antipas, like John in exile on Patmos for being a witness of, we've got examples of those, right? Murderers take away other people's life, but the Lamb and his followers suffer wrongful death. There's just the opposites going on in this thing, right? And you can see that throughout here. And God is assuredly faithful and true, but the question comes, what about us as readers? Are we faithful and true? Right? That's the question coming to us. And so you have this sin list about people excluded from the New Jerusalem, and it comes as a warning. And it doesn't mean that anyone who's ever sinned doesn't get to come to the New Jerusalem, right? God's city is not reserved just for those who have never sinned. God's city is reserved for those who are cleansed by the blood of the Lamb. That's who it is, right? And the heavenly voice names sin in order to move people to reject sin and to trust in the grace that Christ provides, while remaining part of this kind of resistance movement that the conquerors do. We're not going to give in to those worldly pressures. That's not what we're going to do, okay? But we're going to have those pressures. As long as we live in this world that's not the way it's supposed to be, we're going to always need both reassurance and warning. Because we've got pressure to be ourselves, not the way we're supposed to be, right? And there are two eternal abodes in Revelation, right? The New Jerusalem and the lake of fire. All right, then Roman numeral 2, if you're following along on the handout, the city of God. The city of God. What time am I supposed to quit, Garth? Who knows? Okay. Oh, I get to go forever.
3 or 4.
All right. We have a description of the city of God in verses 9 through 16, right? An angel offers to show John the bride of the Lamb, right? In verse 9, they came, one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls full of wrath, the 7 last plagues, and spoke to me, saying, "Come, and I'll show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb." We've already had the city described that way. We've already been introduced to her, so we don't need to do that. But let me suggest to you, remember we spent some time, was it Tuesday or Wednesday, in Revelation chapter 12? One of the things that you remember from that is Satan's a 3-time loser. But do you remember also the concept of the woman? The woman is who? The people of God. Let me suggest then that when you come into chapter 21 and we've got the woman again, that the women in Revelation 12 and 21 depict the same reality, right? Chapter 12 depicts the struggle of the people of God. Chapter 21 is the glory of the people of God, okay? And then in verse 10, John's shown this new Jerusalem descending from heaven. And that's a divine gift, not a human accomplishment. And you cannot have, again, in this verses 9 and 10, that hearing, seeing concept. Right? Hear one thing, see another thing, but they're the same reality going on. And so this New Jerusalem includes place, people, presence, and promise.
Mark?
Yes?
Sorry, I was an emergency. The timer did go, so when you're ready to wrap up. Okay.
When I'm ready? When I'm ready? When I'm ready?
I'm sorry, but I was an emergency. But yes,
Okay.
the timer did go, so when you can wrap up at a good point, that would be...
Okay, there's a couple of things I got to get in.
You got that.
Okay. There's the grandeur of the city in verse 11, right? Having the glory of God, its radiance, and most rare jewel like that, jasper, clear as crystal. Well, jasper kind of is extremely significant because it's back in chapter 4 and verse 3. That's what's around the throne of God, okay? And so this new Jerusalem becomes the epicenter of reality, God's glorious presence among his people. And then you have in verses 12 through 14 the city walls, gates, and foundation stones. Let me at least get this one to you. Chapter 17 through the first part of 19, or maybe the end of 18, right in there, and chapter 21 and 22 should be read together as a tale of two cities. Right? Because Revelation's addressing readers who are pulled in two directions. That we're being pulled to faithfulness and faithlessness, right? And John identifies faithfulness with the holy city. And he identifies faithlessness with the harlot city. And so I know we're supposed to do this because you have this introduction of both of these cities in the same way. In chapter 17, the city Babylon, the harlot, come and I will show you, 17:1. New Jerusalem, come and I will show you, 21:9. John's carried by the Spirit in 17:3 to see the harlot. John is carried by the Spirit in 21:10 to see this New Jerusalem. Those are literary markers to say, compare these two, okay? And so, the book of Revelation presents this important choice to its readers. Will we live as citizens of this world's godless Babylon, or are we going to live as citizens of God's future New Jerusalem? Which city are you a citizen of? Okay? And you get this contrast between Babylon, dystopia, and the New Jerusalem, utopia. And you can work through this list and see that, they're just the opposites. And I probably should make a list a little longer than this, okay? But you can see clearly they are set in opposition to one another, inviting us to really think, which city, do I want to be where the great whore is, or do I want to be with the pure bride? Right? Do I want to ingest of the wine of sexual immorality, or how about the water of life? Right? You've got those contrasts going on. And so Babylon represents those who have deserted God and replaced him with other lovers. But we're given this depiction of the New Jerusalem, the bride, right, that personifies the community of the followers of the Lamb. And this bride's characterized by fidelity to the Lamb. And her garments are justice. And she's got nothing to do with impurity and deception. I'd like you to consider just how much more wonderful God's bride city is going to be than anything the empires of this world have to offer us. I mean, just take some time at some point and read through chapter 17 and 18 and say, is that the place I want to live? And then read through 21 and 22 and say, is that the place I want to live? Right? That's what we're being invited to do right here. Okay? Because we live in the world dominated by Babylon right now. But we're supposed to be, as followers of the Lamb, citizens of the New Jerusalem.
That's right.
But there are traits of the city, and we're supposed to let the traits of the city of New Jerusalem shape our lives in the present, in confidence of the future that belongs to God. In other words, we live like New Jerusalem's a reality. Amazing, right? You remember back on Sunday, I asked you, I don't know if anybody's thought of it since, what type of congregation or individual is Revelation attempting to form? See, it's still at work doing that with contrasting these two cities. Which way do you want to go? You want to go with the whore? Do you want to go with the bride of Christ? What kind of characteristics? New Jerusalem offers wholeness and love in the presence of God. The citizens of the New Jerusalem, oh yeah, that means we live as exiles and pilgrims in the present Babylon, but we are to make sure that our allegiance and our loyalty lie with the bride of Christ rather than Babylon, you could say it this way, do you prefer Sin City? Or do you prefer a holy city? Right? All right, lots more to say there, but at least I think that gets a lot of what's going on in there across to you. Thank you much.